action. Hi guys, it's been a while, and I hope you guys are all healthy and safe because of this COVID situation. But I thought today I'll share with you about my recent quarantine project, Lucid Heist, which I would probably call it a game prototype, pseudo game, because this is actually the first game project that I've pursued on my own. And obviously, it's not bug free. It's not super tight yet, but I thought that it would be good to get it out there and also share with you guys some of the things that I learned along the way. Because I think this has been a very unique opportunity for me to kind of pull together all the things that I've learned in the past like 6 to 5 years about 3D into something that is actually quite meaningful. And this is actually a very how do you describe it? Like a very special moment for me, mostly because I never thought that it was possible for me to build a game system together. Mostly because, like, in the past, for context, I have done a lot of prototyping, because of my past roles at Oculus and at Valve. And I've always done prototyping, but I've always been a little bit terrified of the idea of learning how to program and how to actually stick things, all of them together. And for context, for Lucid Heist, I actually did pretty much every single thing. So I did the characters design, the characters modeling, animations. I did the procedural environment in Houdini. I did all the VFX UI, as well as all the kind of shader work. And then obviously I did the programming things. So I did gameplay programming, general programming, everything programming, audio programming, a bunch of other stuff. And I learned a lot about that, so I thought that it would be a good opportunity to kind of share that out to the world in terms of the things that might be useful for you guys. And so I think this is the perfect time to talk about who is this video for. I actually don't think this is going to be particularly interesting or useful for people who are already full-time in game development. A lot of these kinds of things are probably pretty standard for you, but I definitely think that I want to make this video to be useful for people who are interested to dip their toes into making games, and especially people who are generally similar to me, who have 3D background and probably have done some prototyping before, but never actually pull something together as a whole. So I thought that this might be a good opportunity to kind of package up some of the things that I've learned and share with you guys. Now, before I jump in to talk about all the different topics I want to cover in this video, I do want to say a really big thank you to Marcus Alonso. Clearly, he has been a really wonderful partner in terms of helping me out to feel confident. And it's a very important thing to have mental support, I think, especially if you're doing a after work project on the thing that you've always been terrified about. So that has been super helpful. He's also my collaborator for some of the audio parts of the game experience, which I'm going to have him on board to chat about together. And the second person I do want to acknowledge is actually Robbie Tilton. He has been a really cool person to chat with and actually just brainstorm ideas with. So some of these kind of manifestations of the game, obviously, we kind of chat about and bounce ideas off from. And I'm still hopeful one day when we will actually have a time to actually work on and collaborate on projects together, because I feel like it'll be super fun. Okay, let's jump right in. So what are the topics that we're going to talk about? Okay, so number one, we're going to start talking about procedural assets in general. And that's because I used Houdini for my procedural levels and the galleries and things like that. Number two is to talk about AI programming, which I knew was hard, but it was way harder than I could ever anticipate. And then number three is to talk about the music system. As I mentioned, Marcos Alonso is going to come on and actually chat about some of the explorations that we did together. And then fourthly is to talk about kind of the general details that I put in terms of just making the game a little bit more fun. And then lastly is to talk about the game trailer, which I don't think a lot of people talk about it, but wow, that was kind of really hard for me to do. But yeah, so these are the 5 topics that I'm going to cover, and let's get right into it. Okay, so let's chat about procedural assets. Before I got started with doing Lucid Heist, I actually had some previous experience with Houdini. Not to the production level, but I've always been dabbling with it. So obviously opening up Houdini does not give me like a shell shock, but at the same time, like it is scary to open up Houdini. I don't know anyone who's actually comfortable with Houdini. But yeah, and I thought that it would be a good chance to kind of talk about how I thought about the environment, because I have always been very fascinated by procedural assets, mostly because I'm a super lazy person. Like I don't really like to do a lot of repetitive and mundane tasks. So proceduralism kind of like really works to my personality. It's like set it up and then it's done. But one of the problems with procedural assets is that it's not very art directable. It always feels like a random mess of things, and you're like, well, how do I change or have control over certain things? So what I found that when I found out about wave function collapse, I was very excited about it. And as you guys know, Oscar, who is pretty much the wave function collapse guy in Twitter, he was a big inspiration for that. And I've always wanted to figure out ways to kind of incorporate in my workflow. But it's always really tricky. And I do want to mention that I think there is a lot of ways to express wave function collapse. So you can actually use it for narrative. So people can build text-based stories using wave function collapse. People obviously have done 2D and 3D stuff. So it's pretty versatile. And I have been trying to figure out how to incorporate my workflow. And finally, I stumbled into Simon from Houdini, who published a new tutorial on how you could use wave function collapse nodes inside of the side effects lab in Houdini, and it was amazing. Like I kind of went through a tutorial. It was super helpful. It wasn't exactly, the output wasn't exactly what I wanted, so what I had to go in is actually tweak the model quite a bit. And there's a couple of things that I added that might be interesting for you guys. One thing that I love about Houdini to address the problem of art directability is actually being able to specify certain heuristics. So, certain things like, where to place the characters, because I knew that from the spawn location of the characters inside of the Unreal Engine is that I wanted it to be inside of a small room, in a way where it's not going to be super intimidating when the player first spawn into the world. And then in addition to that, I also wanted to make sure that the exit door that the player has to get to once they grab the art is actually something that's visible to them when they first spawn into the world, so that they would know exactly where they have to be at the end, because it would be very stressful. Imagine if you had to play a level where you're grabbing the art but you have no idea where you're supposed to head to when you're being chased down by a bunch of guards. So that was something that I wanted to take care of, and I kind of folded that into the logic of the game. And obviously there's a bunch of other stuff like spawning AI characters and things like that. The whole system actually ties in pretty well, but I do have one caveat that I have to mention is that Houdini's HDA system actually cannot be changed during runtime. So I mean, in the most ideal world is that every single time when you pick up the portals inside the main menu, the procedures, the kind of level is generated procedurally. So like at that point, like it will have a random seed and then you'll have a new level, and every single time when you play, it'll be different. Unfortunately, HDA does not enable that. So I basically have to manually spawn them first and then allocate it to a particular item for the players to get through into the level. But I think that's all right. Like as a small game, I think it's totally fine. It basically saved a lot of time for me in terms of not having to do a lot of environmental production work, which I really appreciate. And another thing about wave function collapse, the beauty of it is the fact that you can actually nest wave function collapse within wave function collapse, which is what I did for some of the elements in terms of spawning where the guards are going to be, where the guards patrol points, as well as where the AIs are going to be, the guest AI is going to be. And those are actually spawned based on a wave function collapse node set that nest within the big rooms that has been spawned originally by another wave function collapse. And it was a very interesting iterative experience for me in the sense where like figuring out Houdini in a much more practical pipeline level was something that was very beneficial, because obviously in my past with Houdini, it was mostly just toying around and playing with things, but now I actually have to figure out how to get it into Unreal and get it to do the things that I want to do. So I'm pretty happy about that, actually. It was a great learning experience, and I feel like that if you guys want to try it out, like it's definitely a really good thing to test out and see if it works in the things that you want to make.